Welcome again, everybody, to this webinar, Cybersecurity and CAN FD. My name is Martin Merkel. I am a technical manager at CAN Automation since 1.5 years. I have a word on these 1.5 years in a second. I have degrees in physics from Mainz University. I spent 14 years at CERN in Geneva, working mostly on data, not that much on physics, but mostly on data acquisition, control, and industrial communication systems. That's also where I got first in touch with CAN Open. That was around 1997 or 1998. I don't remember anymore. I made an initial proposal actually to distribute operating system documentation in HTML as early as 1993, because Tim Berners-Lee, one of the fathers of the World Wide Web, was sitting in the office above me. I later on was product owner for CAN Open embedded control, and later also Ethernet IP for a few companies based in southern Germany. Essentially, I have 27 years of experience with CAN and CAN Open, and by now close to 40 years with data acquisition and control systems. I think I started with my diploma. I was 1986 working on data acquisition systems. I will have a few words on CAN Automation now and the objectives. CAN Automation is an international users manufacturers group developing and supports CAN Open and CAN-based higher layer protocols. It's a non-profit organization that was founded in 1992, and we provide CAN-based technical product and marketing information. The idea is to foster the image of CAN technology and also provide a path to future network technologies. A brief history of CAN Automation. So as mentioned, the CAN Automation eingetragener Verein the association was founded in 1992. It was the same year the first CAN newsletter published. The first international CAN conference in Mainz was organized in 1994. That was actually the time while I was in Geneva, so wasn't attending. And in 1994, CiA, the first versions of CiA, which is now called kind of Open CC application layer, emerged. Then in 2000, the CAN Automation GmbH, the company limited, it was founded in 2000. So Rainer Zitzmann is the CEO of that company. Going a couple of years later, in 2012, CAN FD was presented for the first time in the International CAN Conference at Hambach Castle in Germany. And in 2018, the first meeting on CAN XL, extended data field length, was organized. This slide is not necessarily up to date because this changes all the time a bit. There had been a few members excluded in the beginning of the year, but there are plenty more, and I lose keeping track of them, that joined CAN Automation. That's pretty much the distribution. Most of them are in Central Europe, but also a significant number in the Far East and North America. So most of them are here. There are currently 450 members, a couple of big companies, smaller companies. So a good mixture, actually. So the board of directors of CAN Automation of the association is essentially a general assembly that is headed by a managing director, which is Holger Seldwanger, since many years. There's a business director, which is Christian Schlegel from Christian Schlegel Consulting, and the technical director, which is Magnus Hell from Infineon. In those committees, there are up to 5 annually elected members. There are Bosch, Emotas, ESD, Microcontrol, and Vector. In the technical committee, which is headed by Magnus Hell, there are the 5 annually elected members, plus basically representatives of 8 interest groups, which we will see in a second. Currently, under the technical committee, there are task forces, and they're classically the interest group CAN Open that defined the original CAN Open CC, the CAN Open FD interest group, which is currently chaired by Uwe Kopper from Microcontrol. I had been the chair of this interest group for a couple of years, There are plenty of profile working or special interest groups, lower layers. There's also activity in the area of J1939, but that is not necessarily the highest priority. Safety and security, which has been becoming more and more important recently again. High availability, which is currently a bit on lower priority, just because people have plenty of things to do. And there's a new group which is called Ethernetification of CAN. There's no special interest group under that, but we will have a word on that in one of the following slides. Canon automation also contributes to national and international organizations. There's these DIN 4630, DIN 1400, 700, and in particular activities in ISO 11898-1 and then -2. That's basically the CAN specifications. There had been new editions published early last year in 2024. Part 2 is currently under review actually, and we have a next session, I think, end of December. And the idea is to publish a new edition which corrects errors I think it is scheduled for early Q2 2026. There's also an activity which I'm participating actually in ISO 22166, modularity for service robots, although we essentially focus on communication aspects in this group. We organize something like this, webinars, technology days. We're currently working on a schedule for 2026. There are potential topics, data-driven agri-food systems, so greenhouses, for example, or livestock feeding. Embedded networking in light electric vehicles might be a topic, and communication in modular service robots, though I suspect the latter will rather be towards the end of the year. These webinars or workshops all in English, essentially English language, basically particularly for the service robots. The majority of the participants in these ISO groups coming from the Far East, Japan, Korea, China. There are a few people from England as well and Europe, but it's natural that we have to do that in English. Participation in these technology days and workshops essentially free of charge, but you have to register by mandatory. So to get the dial-in link. So please contact events@can-cia.org for any details. So concerning the webinars, we are now on 20th of November, Cybersecurity in CAN FD. There will be one more webinar towards mid-December, CAN-XL network design, that will be hosted by a colleague of mine, Oskar Kaplun. Again, you have to register to participate. Good. So that's basically the housekeeping and information on CAN automation. And we come now to the topic of the day. So cybersecurity and CAN FD. I'd rather say cybersecurity and CAN because it's becoming in the a big topic over the last actually 3 years in the networking community, not just in the industrial communications or automation community, as it would be when we organize it, suggested by the name Canon Automation, but in particular also in the automotive industry. So everybody is now talking about cybersecurity and has to address this topic. So it does not stop, for example, in modern cars, software-defined vehicles, this buzzword, but it's also in industrial installations, automation systems, and service robots, for example. It will be definitely a topic because you wouldn't like a service robot to be manipulated. What is the regular background on part of the EU? There's the Cybersecurity Act, which entered into force in 2019, mid-2019. I must admit I haven't really read it because they are not extremely entertaining, and you have to search for information in these EU documents. One of the interesting things, it established a permanent mandate for ENISA, the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, which is based in Athens, in Greece, and introduced a uniform European certification framework for industrial communication technology products, services, and processes also. More recent, there's the Cyber Resilience Act, which entered into force in December last year, so close to a year ago. And it requires that all stuff in there has to be complied with by December 11th, 2027, which is not too far away, given the speed how things advance. There are still discussions, and people do not agree, but one of the things that you have to apply all the requirements from the CiA to new products. So what is a new product? Is it an existing product that is sold on the market, or is it a new product that is completely developed from scratch? So there are disagreements. But some of the parts are essentially everything with digital elements integrated and connected to a large electronic information system can serve as an attack vector for malicious actors. And they might be hackers or state actors. Yeah. And we see that recently more and more. And manufacturers, that's all in the same clause of the or paragraph of the preamble. Manufacturers should therefore ensure that all products with digital elements are designed and developed in accordance to the essential cybersecurity requirements laid down in these regulations. As mentioned, it's sometimes a bit hard to find what are the essential cybersecurity requirements, but this is something that everybody has to get through. Yeah. I don't have it open in the background, but it's plenty of pages, and they are not entertaining to read. There's one caveat. In this CiA, there's an Article 14 on reporting obligations and of manufacturers that applies to or is applicable as of September 11th next year. So a manufacturer shall notify any actively exploitable vulnerability contained in the product with digital elements that it becomes aware, blah, 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 to whatever, and to ENISA. So when you detect a vulnerability, you have 24 hours to give a warning, 72 hours to give a more detailed vulnerability notifications, and then after you have corrected this, you have 14 days to provide a final report. This is stuff that you have to search for in the CiA because it's not written in Article 14, this particular date, but basically just above the signature of the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola. So pretty much at the end of the document. And I think it's in Article 71, something like that. It's something that we have to address and we have to get along with. As one of the first obligations, we have this vulnerability reporting. There is actually since quite some years, plenty of years, I think, similar to CERT, the Computer Emergency Response Team. There's FIRST, which is the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams, and they offer a vulnerability scoring system calculator that you can access via the website. I have a screen dump in the next slide. The first documentation is quite extensive, but it doesn't really relate to field bus communication per se, but has more IoT applications in mind. And the thing, this calculator doesn't really apply to embedded technologies. It doesn't map directly one-to-one. So it potentially creates inconsistent results. Therefore, so here's a screen dump of this. You see if, yeah, you probably can actually read it still. the web address. It's also behind this link that you will get with the slides. So there you can play around, and one of the first things is if you have physical access, the score goes up immediately. And when you have an additional requirement, so it's not visible here due to the screen dump, it's a lengthy list. When you have high availability requirements, it blows up your scoring value quite drastically, and then you have to, let's say, discuss around it, how you get along with it. It's complex. That's why within Canon automation, we have to address these topics. What do we have within Canon automation? There's, first of all, I mentioned the different interest groups and special interest groups that we have. There's interest group 06, special interest group 02, HLP cybersecurity. The scope develops and maintains technical documents related to CAN-based cybersecurity, including a secure key management. That was the original scope defined. It's active since about 2 years. There had been very first ideas on documents, but we figured out essentially we have to rewrite them entirely. But the special interest group has also been asked actually to provide a guideline how to use this CVS S2 4 scoring system. This is something there's a white paper currently available on one of the special interest group members' website. This will likely migrate into a Canon automation document. There's another interest group which has been founded in March this year, which I have mentioned before. So scope is CiA develops, releases, and maintains technical documents related to mapping of Ethernet frames to CAN frames. The main motivation here is essentially enabling Ethernet communication on top of a CAN FD physical layer, basically allowing to use the typical security functionality that you have available in Ethernet, but you leverage and profit from the performance of CAN systems. This is essentially triggered by requirements of automotive industry and the buzzword that I mentioned, the software-defined vehicle. The idea here is that you use CAN FD frames, map the information cleverly onto the frames, and actually it uses 29-bit identifiers. We come to that briefly later, to 29 bits. And maps Ethernet source addresses and destination addresses cleverly onto the 29-bit in the identifier, the CAN identifier. Rather new is the special interest group. By the way, I forgot to mention the next meeting of this interest group is in 2 weeks' time, I think, on December 2nd, sorry, excuse me. And there we will hopefully be able to finally define the documents themselves that we will create. There have been proposals for titles, and then we can start with the structure, and then we have to gradually fill in the structure into these documents. Even more recent, there's under the interest group 04, which is the lower layer interest group, there's the 606 called CAN FD. So here the scope is to develop, release, and maintain technical documents related to additional sublayers and functions of the CAN FD data link layer. This includes encapsulation of higher layer OC SDUs, so service data units. It includes potentially CAN-SEC and fragmentation functionalities. This is active since July. There was a meeting scheduled initially for early October, but that had been postponed until early November. Again, it's triggered by the requirements of the automotive industry. In this meeting in early November, there was just on PowerPoint, not a paper yet, enhanced proposal presented. So the idea there is to essentially take everything above in the higher layers, map it to on onto a CAN XL frame, use then the CAN XL higher layer functions, the service data unit types, to map, for example, CAN FD again onto it, and then use the XL add-on service functionalities, for example, part 2, CANSEC data plane, which is currently in work. There are no CiA documents yet at all. There have been vague proposals on which documents to be created. So let's go to embedded networks with the example of CAN technologies. So CAN is not necessarily new. It was designed for embedded networks which have limited resources, both with respect to processing power and memory. Small frame sizes, that was one of the major requirements to allow for low latencies. Trusted platforms are frequently not available on those, particularly on existing hardware. No real-time clock for precise timestamp on the devices. So it is limited, and particularly when you think of a small sensor, then you easily run into issues implementing security functionality on top of those older devices. So typically there you have cryptographic primitives with, for example, pre-shared keys. You require a certain level of randomness just to get authentication with hello scheme, hello and answer scheme. Uniqueness, basically you would like to prevent replay attacks. And authentication attacks, we look a bit into CAN CAN FD, in particular in the following slides. One of the initial requirements, which was, I was still young then, in the late, in the 80s still. So low latencies, broadcast message transmission, message identification instead of node addressing, multi-master bus access, non-destructive bus arbitration, prioritized identifier, error detection, transmission, and fault confinement. It started in 1992, the early development, and basically the first editions of the ISO specifications were published in 2003. That just covered classic CAN, so which is now called CAN CC. FD development started in 2011. And it was presented, as mentioned earlier, in the International CAN Conference in 2012 at Hambach CAS, well, it was 2012, yeah. And then ISO 11898-1 was updated in 2015, and 2016 followed the 11898-2. Also, in the first ISO CAN FD versions were available in 2015. In 2018, there was the CAN XL project, again driven by the higher requirements of the automotive data bandwidth requirements of automotive industry. They were published last year. The update of part 2 is expected for Q2. So mainly error corrections, no enhancements, as I remember, really. I'm editing it, so I'm doing diagrams and creating diagrams. But also those documents from 2024, they describe only the data link layer and the physical layer, nothing else. So everything above is outside the scope of these documents. What is the problem there? None of the ISO specification referenced earlier, 2003, 2015, 16, 24, or even the 2026, address security. That was not on the list of requirements, and particularly when development started in the early 80s. There are proposals now to add an additional security sublayer to OC layer 2, the data link layer above the LLC in the MAC. This is work in progress and will primarily apply to CAN XL. We have to see how far we get, for example, with this interest group 04 SIG 08 CAN FD, where the idea is to use or abuse the CANSEC also for other than technologies than CAN XL only. But this will not be part of the update of the 11898-2, so it's not going into the ISO specification. However, there's quite active work on a document which is called 613, CiA 613-2, and the specification is supposed to be published sometime next year. They have to be plugfest because you have to be sure that everything works together. So how does the latter look like, this idea, this proposal? You have your LLC subsystem, you have your Mac subsystem that you've seen just before, and then you add security subsystem above, a sublayer in the OC jargon, and also a fragmentation sublayer. And you see on the right one of the drawings from the documents, the CiA documents, is essentially how that will work. So, for example, if you have an encrypted or Ethernet frame, which is, for example, using MACsec, you pack that into an PDU, put it into the LLC in the or in the data link layer, essentially, and then you cascade it through first into a fragmentation, CAN-SEC sublayer. Then you fragment the thing and then get it in with fragmentation for XL is some sort of interesting to maintain the low latencies, shorter frames. And at the end, you get a number of shorter frames that have a header. And at the end, they have a CAN security footer. But this is, again, work in progress. The diagram on the right is also not most recent. When we look at CAN-CC, here we see immediately what kind of problems we're facing. We have basically in the data payload 8 bytes available, which is not that much. Okay, there's remote frame, which I think most people would like to get rid of anyway. But the CAN-CC frame supports just these 8 data bytes, and you will fast see that it's not easy to get, for example, authentication tags or whatever salts that you have to provide, or whatever random numbers into that 8 data bytes. So we have clear limitations what we can do on the level of security with just putting security into each and every frame. So CAN-CC supports also the 11-bit identifier and the 29-bit identifier, but again, only 8 bytes. So this is the severe limitation, but we have to see, because we got a clear message in one of the interest groups. Next, we have CAN FD, and the basic communication service is a data frame. So there's no remote frames or anymore. You have up to 64 bytes, which is significantly more, and you have the extended 29-bit identifiers that are still supported. That is currently used or in the proposal of this Ethernetification of CAN interest group, so that you use basically the 29-bit identifier in conjunction with the 64 bytes. And for example, to distinguish it from J1939, which is a protocol that is used, SAE J1939, which is used in trucks, there's one reserved bit in the SAE J1939 identifier, which is by default set to 0. So the Ethernetification proposal sets this to 1, so you can clearly distinguish it from a J1939 frame and just the what they call CAN adaptation layer proposal. Again, 11 and 29-bit identifiers, 64 data byte, and that's something which is fairly, it is similar. The data fields or there's different transmission rates, so even if the frame is longer with 64 bytes than the 8-byte CAN-CC frame, it's not that much longer in time because the bit rates are driven up in the data field significantly. So again, you maintain the requirement of short latencies. So here it's a short summary: higher data transmission rate options compared to CAN CC, which again allows for low latencies. Now we come finally to the security development. We have a few examples, although I must admit we are not that far as we would have expected with these developments yet, given the time that we worked on it. We look at CAN CC, CAN OpenFD, and J1939. Essentially, where are these higher level protocols located in the OC model? They are all above the data link layer. So they just have to use the data link layer as is. It might be to some extent that they can profit from whatever additional sublayers in the data link layer later on, but we need to see if that really applies to something else than XL. CAN Automation published the CiA version 4.2. I think it was in the latest version in the mid-2000s. I think that was the last update. Again, limited to 8 data bytes. We have services for network management, process data, service data. The service data is the least critical in the sense of security because you have a segmented transfer, which essentially allows unlimited data transfer sizes, which needs to be exploited by some extent by security concepts. Critical here is network management, because with network management you can do quite a lot of damage when you get into a network. Process data, okay, you're also limited to 8 data bytes, so not much space for authentication tags and information. Quite some time ago, we published CiA 1301. It's currently the version 1.1. It's a more flexible USDO services, but again, we have similar functionalities like network management, process data, and service data. Service data, it's either common, or network management currently use 2 bytes, process data either 8 or 64 bytes, or for service data we use in the expedited transfer mode at most 4, or for CAN FD, CAN OpenFD is 56 bytes of data. The normal, which is most people call it segmented transfer, is virtually unlimited. So in CAN OpenCC it is unlimited, excuse me, and in CAN OpenFD it's limited to the power of 32 bytes, so it's plenty of information you can get in there. So it's not really critical to put in tags there at the end of the user data. So we have to think of where to put the security information into. The services are all specified in the application layer. So security management has not been added to these application layers yet. And given to the age, particularly of CiA 301, so it's more than 20 years old now, there's limited inclination to reopen this document again. So it might be an addendum or a corrigendum to this document, where we describe additional security-related functionality. It has to go into the application layer. It would be easier for CAN OpenFD, but CAN OpenFD is not widely adopted yet out in industrial applications, as, for example, CAN OpenCC was. It's frequently internal in machines where we could actually make use of that. One idea that recently over this year emerged is that we define additional object dictionary entries that complement already existing entries, definitions. For example, we have in CAN Open the identity object, which is a record. So you have essentially 4 sub-indices which contain vendor ID, product code, revision number, serial number, and the number of sub-indices that you actually implement. This would be, and the reason why this is C1018 is in green, it's not fixed, not specified anywhere, it's just an initial proposal. you have an object which is an authenticated identification, which is not anymore data type record, but of type domain, so essentially stream data. So you would require for CAN OpenCC definitely the normal segmented transfer. With CAN OpenFD, you could potentially get along with standard USDO transfer. But using stream data allows basically security stamps to be added to handle or encrypt and provide authenticity to user data, which is very important in terms of device identification, who is in the network. You would like to see that all the devices in there are actually expected devices. So this is work in progress. They are both secure or authenticated objects and non-authenticated objects, because one of them, or for people familiar with CAN-Open, you know that there's an object 1000 device type. There is a proposal to have an object C1000, which would use or be used to indicate security capabilities, for example, what kind of mechanisms you use, and that you have to be able to read without having a secure channel enabled. Once you have the capabilities read, you can apply or get into a secure channel and, for example, read identities, and then build secure communication between participants, which is authenticated and potentially even encrypted. That we have to see how much is possible there. So service data, as mentioned, stream data gives much more flexibility. However, stream data pose one problem because in some of the meetings we discussed not only security but also safety. And for example, for those that know the CAN Open Safety concept, we have safety-related data objects which allow to map at most 4 data byte of user information, and it's not possible to map domains with that. So to have basically one and the same mechanisms to exchange data for both safety requirements and security requirements will not easily be possible without defining additional protocols. On the other hand, service data is the common way to update firmware. And firmware updates are, or pretended firmware updates are an easy possibility to break into the system if you download falsified or mal firmware instead of the authenticated firmware. So this service is very important, and that will be addressed as one of the first ones in either the former bootloader task force or also within the higher level protocol task special interest group that we are active. How, for example, an authenticated parameter read would work as a sequencer. So you provide a uniqueness value, which is a client random value, currently proposed 64 bits. Again, you see already, you need already for that segmented transfer for CAN OpenCC, because yeah, you have only 64 bits in the entire CAN frame, and payload of expedited transfer only 32 bits. For CAN OpenFD, that would be much easier, and there you could get along without the segmentation. Then basically based on the client random value, the server calculates another random value and provides an authentication tag that has been downloaded before, and provides the data. And then on the client side, this tag is validated, and you either accept the data or reject the data. So that is one of the examples that was presented in one of the last meetings, I think mid-September. But again, it is not yet in a formal CiA document. So for CAN CC, clearly we have the 8-byte size limitation. You have bandwidth, so you cannot transfer, or you would like to avoid to transfer everything via segmented transfer, because you have only a megabit at most. We are facing our one problem, because members of the cybersecurity group, the special interest group, I need to say, they expressed a clear need for support within CAN OpenCC applications. And even worse, if possible, without changing hardware. I'm skeptical that at least without changing hardware, this will be easily possible. But those members told us that they have such a large installed base of hardware that they cannot simply change it. Yeah, and so we have to see what we can do. One way would be to get along with basically authentication, physical access limitation or restrictions, and there's another concept which is called ID guarding, that you don't see CAN identifiers that you do not expect in the network, and regularly monitor or scan the network for basically authenticated device identities. And if you find somebody that is not belonging to the network, you shut it down and at least flag a security breach. For process data, the same limitations apply for CAN OpenCC. It will be challenging at best for CAN OpenCC. For CAN OpenFD, it might be easier. There have been prototypes implemented. I have seen only photos of them, but I haven't seen them in the flesh, that demonstrate principally the feasibility of having security stamps for individual frames in CAN-based FD protocols. This particular prototype was built based on CAN OpenFD in collaboration with, for example, the Hochschule Offenburg. Then we have network management, which is very critical because basically, first of all, they are short messages. They are currently 2 bytes. It's a command specifier and a node ID. Node ID zeros, you address everything in the network, and the command specifier, there's one that shuts down the entire network. So this is something that you like to avoid, shutting down a network by an attacker, particularly given a critical infrastructure depending on that, on CAN open networks partially. The last thing that you would like to have, just to shut it down. Yeah. So there's a very, very early proposal, which is not even in a white paper yet, to trigger network management control. So network management state machine transitions, not via these short messages anymore, but via writing to an object dictionary entry that is authenticated. And once the authentication has passed, then you do an internal change in the network management state machine. So that at least gives some sort of protection, but you have to put the network into a secure state before. This is an open topic. There's nothing really on paper yet, but apart from a one-liner in a white paper. It remains to be discussed, and for all those that are active within CAN automation, I would like to join them this discussion. Again, next meeting, December 11th this year. So I have a short word on J1939 cybersecurity. I'm not an expert in J1939, but there's a series of documents that has been proposed. Of those, when we got a presentation by somebody more involved with that last year, 1939, 91A was still in work. It has been published now this year in March. It gives recommendations on a network architecture and domain security. Essentially, it tells you segregate documents into different or partition networks into independent security domains. we have to obtain a copy of this document. I just looked earlier today how to get it, but you can buy it now at the SAE website. 91B, which is essentially for telematics. So that's the first thing that you would like to exclude and protect from in a truck internal network, for example, telematics or over-the-air communications, because that's the way how to get into that network when there's no protection. I'm not sure. I haven't seen any work on this document yet, but I may be wrong. 91C essentially is a concept that requires CAN FD and defines secure messages with optional encryption. This is still work in progress. Some of the concepts that are in clause 6 of the 91A in the technical recommendations: network segregation, separate onboard diagnostics, telematics from the issues with secure access, the engine controller, body controller, implement firewall functions where possible to protect internal networks, and also similar to, for example, CAN ID monitoring, do an anomaly detection and a prevention system. You have to detect, log, and prevent anomalies in the network. Logging is an important thing because this again doesn't apply to J1939 alone, but it would also apply to CAN Open. And one of the members of the interest groups, special interest groups, was joking. He said, "I have to add. Do I have to add now a hard disk to my little small temperature sensor or something like that?" So it poses an issue because you normally don't have that much non-volatile memory on small sensors. So again, this is topics that need to be addressed in the CAN Open area, and I will try to get a copy of this thing very soon. So initial conclusions for CAN security. Data link layer security, as for example with CAN XL, is probably not applicable to industrial protocol. It's currently deployed. So for CAN Open FD, there might be a way around if you do this mapping onto XL frames, then apply CANSEC, and then remap it into small fragments again, and just send out encrypted CAN Open FD frames out. But this is not something that happens in the next half year for sure. The industrial applications specifications, they will require amendments to the protocol specifications for the upper layers. To some extent, easier for CAN Open FD. J1939, I'm interested in this part 91C. And I think by now most people agree that it will not be possible to apply security to all higher level protocol services without compromising system performance. So we come to the summary. There are very successful network implementations in automotive and industrial application domains. Payload and performance limitations resulted, or initially were imposed by low latency requirements, but resulted in the development of CAN FD, which is now pretty much in every car, not with CAN Open, but CAN proprietary networks or whatever. But all controllers in the car have CAN FD, or at the highest level, Ethernet now. Industrial automation has not yet widely adopted CAN FD, so it might come still because it's still cheaper than Ethernet. Security-related regulations may drive a shift to CAN FD, also for industrial automations, because basically we are forced to think about that at latest by 2027. And there are some people say that this vulnerability reporting, they say by default our products are not secure, so at least to avoid any misunderstandings. Yeah. Proposals to enable security for CAN FD networks in-vehicle networks are currently under discussions. That is, for example, either the Ethernet delegation or the J1939 or the special interest group 06 under the lower layers in CAN FD, but again, automotive applications. So that's pretty much the end of the presentations.